The wind howled like a wounded animal across the frozen peaks, slicing through the silence of the northern mountains. Snow drifted endlessly, covering the world in white loneliness. In a place so far from humanity that even time seemed to slow its breath, a small wooden house stood stubbornly against the cold. Inside that house lived an old man named Arthur, a man whose face carried the weight of countless winters and whose eyes hid stories no one had ever heard. He had chosen isolation not because he hated people, but because life had once taken everything from him. Or so it seemed. That morning, the sun rose pale and weak behind gray clouds. Arthur pushed open his creaking door, wrapped his worn coat tighter around his thin frame, and stepped outside to breathe the icy air. His boots crunched softly against the frost-covered ground. He was about to turn back inside when something ahead froze him in place. At the edge of the mountain cliff stood a young woman. She was small against the massive sky, her dark hair whipping wildly in the wind, her body swaying dangerously close to the endless drop below. One more step forward, and there would be nothing but empty air, thousands of feet of silence, and a fall that would never forgive. Arthur's heart slammed violently in his chest. He did not stop to think. He did not hesitate. His old legs burned as he ran across the snow, his lungs screaming for air. The wind tried to push him back, but fear pushed him forward harder. Just as the young woman leaned into the abyss, he grabbed her arm with every ounce of strength left in his fragile body and yanked her backward. She spun around in rage and shock, her eyes blazing through tears. Her voice cracked as she screamed at him, accusing him of stealing her choice, her freedom, her ending. She tried to rush forward again, but Arthur grabbed her once more, refusing to let her go. His hands trembled, yet his grip was firm, his eyes steady. He spoke gently, his voice barely louder than the wind, asking her what had driven her to such despair, telling her that maybe, just maybe, someone still cared enough to help. The words broke something inside her. Tears poured down her face as the truth spilled out between sobs. Her husband had vanished without a trace. Her family had rejected her, blaming her for the shame and pain of his disappearance. She had no home, no support, no future, only endless nights filled with fear and hunger and loneliness. She had walked into the mountains searching for silence, and instead found the edge of forever. Arthur listened without interrupting. He did not judge. When her voice finally faded into quiet trembling, he gently held her wrist and motioned for her to follow him. She hesitated, fear still tangled in her chest, but exhaustion and hopelessness left her with nowhere else to go. They walked along the narrow path, snow crunching beneath their feet, the wind whispering secrets through the frozen trees. She asked again and again where he was taking her, but Arthur remained silent. Eventually, the small wooden house appeared through the drifting snow. He opened the door and guided her inside. The warmth of the fire inside contrasted sharply with the deadly cold outside. The moment she stepped in, he closed the door and locked it. Panic flooded her veins. Her voice shook as she demanded answers, fear clawing at her chest. Arthur said nothing. He simply looked at her with an expression she could not understand, something like sorrow mixed with determination. Then, without warning, he opened the door again, stepped outside, and locked it from the outside. Her heart thundered. She pounded on the door, screaming his name, demanding to know where he was going. Her voice echoed uselessly into the empty mountains. But Arthur was already walking away. The hours crawled painfully. Tears soaked her face until there were no more left to cry. The sun disappeared behind the mountains, and darkness swallowed the world. Alone in the strange cabin, fear pressed against her like the cold outside the walls. Late that night, the door finally opened. Arthur stepped inside quietly. Anger exploded from her exhaustion and terror, but he only spoke calmly, telling her not to be afraid and to consider the house her own. He said she could stay there, that she no longer needed to go anywhere. Something in his eyes unsettled her, a hidden depth, a secret buried behind years of silence. But she was broken, homeless, and emotionally empty. When he spoke gently and patiently, her resistance slowly faded. She agreed to stay, if only because there was nowhere else left. He showed her a simple bed and told her to sleep. Her body collapsed into rest almost instantly. Arthur lay on his own bed, staring into the darkness. Sleep refused to come. His thoughts circled endlessly around the young woman's face, her pain, her innocence, and the fragile hope he dared not voice aloud. Morning arrived, with pale light slipping through the cracks of the wooden walls. Arthur stood quietly beside her bed, watching her breathe, memorizing every detail as though afraid it might disappear. When she stirred and opened her eyes, startled to see him standing there, he gently told her it was morning. Then he stepped outside and locked the door again. He would leave her alone during the day, return at night, speak little, and watch her sleep with silent intensity. Sometimes he whispered under his breath and gently blew his breath toward her as she slept. His actions felt strange, unsettling, and confusing, planting seeds of fear in her heart. One day, he took her up the mountain path again, guiding her back to the same cliff where he had saved her life. He asked her to lie down and close her eyes. Confused and nervous, she obeyed. He whispered softly and blew his breath toward her again, then quietly left her alone on the mountain as night slowly swallowed the sky. Her fear deepened into suspicion. When this happened again and again, her trust began to fracture. She wondered if she had escaped death, only to fall into something worse. His silence felt heavier than words. His strange rituals haunted her thoughts. She no longer knew whether to fear the cliff or the man who claimed to protect her. One night, exhausted by confusion and emotional strain, she pretended to sleep while secretly watching him. She saw him standing over her, whispering something like a prayer, blowing his breath gently toward her face. It was not violent, not cruel, but deeply mysterious. The next morning, when he tried to take her back to the mountains again, she resisted fiercely. Anger poured out of her in desperation. She demanded answers, accusing him of madness and manipulation. For the first time, his voice carried firmness, as he asked her to trust him one last time. He told her everything would make sense soon, that this strange journey was for her own good. Reluctantly, emotionally exhausted, she agreed. That final night, they lay down together on the cold mountain ground under a sky scattered with fading stars. The wind whispered through the peaks, like a slow breath of destiny. She closed her eyes, drained by emotional turmoil. Just before sunrise, she felt him stand behind her and gently cover her eyes. Suddenly, she pulled free in panic. When she turned around, the old man was gone. Standing in front of her was a young man, strong, familiar, and impossibly real. Her heart shattered open in disbelief and joy. Tears rushed down her face as she recognized the face she had mourned endlessly. Her husband stood before her, alive, smiling, eyes filled with love and relief. She ran into his arms, crying and laughing all at once, overwhelmed by the miracle unfolding before her. Questions spilled from her lips. Where had he been? How was this possible? Where was the old man? He held her gently and led her back toward the wooden house. There, he finally told her the truth. The day he had disappeared, he had encountered a mysterious woman who tried to bind him through dark magic when he refused her. With a whisper and a breath, she cursed him, transforming him into an old man. Desperate and ashamed, unable to face his wife in such a form, he wandered until he met a spiritual guide who explained that only patience, purity of intention, and true love could break the curse. He had been told to live alone in isolation. If his wife found him naturally, if he protected her without revealing his identity, if he prayed over her nightly and endured her misunderstanding without bitterness, then one day the spell would break when she embraced him willingly. Every strange action had been part of protection and prayer. Locking her inside was to keep her safe from the brutal cold and wild dangers of the mountains. Taking her to the peaks was part of the spiritual ritual required to weaken the curse. The whispered prayers and gentle breaths were blessings meant to shield her heart and soul from lingering darkness. He had suffered in silence, afraid that revealing the truth would destroy the only chance of saving both of them. Tears streamed down her face as realization crashed over her. The man she had feared had been the man she loved all along. The silence she had misunderstood had been sacrifice. The loneliness she had resented had been devotion. She hugged him tightly, apologizing through tears for every doubt, every fearful thought. He smiled softly, forgiving her without hesitation, grateful only that fate had reunited them at last. The frozen mountains no longer felt cold. The wooden house no longer felt lonely. What once seemed like a prison became a sanctuary of rebirth. Love had endured confusion. Faith had defeated darkness. Patience had transformed suffering into redemption. Sometimes life places us inside stories we do not understand. We judge too quickly. We fear what we cannot explain. But behind many silences lives a heart quietly fighting battles we cannot see. Behind many strange actions hides a deeper love than words could ever express. Pain can disguise purpose. Loneliness can prepare miracles. And even when the world feels empty and unfair, unseen hands may be guiding us toward healing. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that hope can survive even the coldest storms, take a moment to show your support. Like the video, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss stories that uplift, inspire, and heal. Because every soul deserves a reminder that love never truly disappears. It simply waits for the right moment to return.